Hi, I'm Denise. I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober today by the grace of God and the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is September 18th, 1987. My sponsor is Sharon C., my home group's Pacific group, and I sponsor Incredible Women. And thank you so much for inviting me. So I grew up in Southern California. My dad, second generation AA, got sober when I was around 12, 13 years old. But we still never talked about alcoholism, and we still never spoke about what happened to my dad. We just put him in a car, came back 7 weeks later. Instead of going to a bar every night, he went to AA every night. And so I really didn't understand what alcoholism was, except that I didn't want to drink like him. And as long as I didn't drink like him, then I knew that so I remember I grew up going to Catholic school, fairly privileged Southern California. Even though my dad, with his alcoholism, they still did very well. And I remember I loved religion. I used to watch these movies like Our Lady of Fatima and all this stuff. And I wanted to be a nun one day, right? And the funny part is when I had actually done a fourth and fifth step later on when I got to AA, the truth was I didn't want to be a nun. I wanted to be a martyr or a saint. Like a nun would not have been high enough for me. And I was an athlete and, just fairly innocent. I remember I was about 12, 13 years old, meeting some of my girlfriends. Back then, our parents left us home alone a lot. And I remember they brought a cigarette. And I thought, oh, my God, they're going to do drugs. And I don't want to do drugs. And so, but I had to show off still. And because we were getting together, we were doing a little dance to Three Dog Night, and we were going to show our parents that night. And this is how innocent it was. And I remember seeing this big bottle of warm Burgundy wine sitting on top of the refrigerator at my friend's house. And I thought, okay, I'm going to drink a glass of that because they're doing a drug. And so I ended up pouring this big tumbler of warm Burgundy wine. And back then, we had like white carpet, white furniture. And I remember I loved the way it went down, and I made sure they all watched me. I even loved the way it came back up, and I ended up getting sick all over everything. And then everybody talked about me for like 2 weeks. Maybe it wasn't good, but they talked about me. And that kind of was my alcoholism, right? So then I swore off it because it scared me. So right off the bat, I drank for the effect of not only what alcohol does to me, but what it did for me. And then I didn't drink at all. And in high school, went to, we'd go to parties and we would, hang out and do all this. There'd be a lot of drinking. And anytime I drank, I always drank too much. I was the girl that, would have to be carried to the car and, getting sick. Like I never drank, like I hear people talk about, I drank like a lady at first, never. And and then unfortunately, I got in the car with the wrong person and ended up being left in an alley pretty much to die. And I couldn't be a nun anymore. So then what do? I do exactly what you do in alcoholism. You say one thing and do the opposite. So I married a coke smuggler. And so here I am married to a coke smuggler in Malibu and thinking that that's okay. I didn't know it when I first met him, but and that took a lot of incomprehensible demoralization and a lot of fear. I didn't come from this world, and it was very terrifying. And I learned then to not acknowledge fear, that I would not, in fact, he pretty much said, you'll get us killed unless you either make people think you're crazy or that you have no fear. Excuse me. And so I kind of went both ways. I thought I was invincible, and at the same time, I could make you think I was absolutely crazy. And then, you know, I got pregnant because, of course, isn't that going to fix it? That's going to make him stop being a Coke smuggler. And, you know, and I drank on a daily basis up until I was pregnant, and I was able to swear off. Now, this is also my pattern, is I could swear off. And so for a long time, I didn't think I was an alcoholic because I could stop drinking. I didn't understand that also alcoholism is I couldn't stay stopped. I could swear off with or without a solemn oath, like the book says, but the time always came where I could not drink, and I would again pick up the drink. And so I have this baby, and thank God I did, because I think she moved me just about 6 feet from the edge of the cliff. If I didn't have her, I might have still been just like, you know, it doesn't matter what happens to me. And then the next minute, you know, I wasn't fun anymore, and he left me. I'd like to say I left him, but he left me, you know, and now I'm single and I'm trying to not drink, and then I'm drinking, and I'm a single mom. And this is the girl who's Catholic, like divorce and that kind of stuff isn't supposed to happen. And now I'm a single mom. I'm this young girl that's a single mom in her 20s, and I meet another him. And at least he wasn't a Coke smuggler, right? He was a pretty bad alcoholic, and he liked to sell pot once in a while, but he wasn't a Coke smuggler. So I thought I was like, you know, had arrived. And the same thing happened, you know, same type of stuff is happening, same fights, same drinking. And then I swear off again, and then I'm pregnant again. And now I'm swearing off. I'm not drinking, you know, because that's one of the lines I won't cross. And at about 7 months pregnant, he just didn't give me the attention I wanted. And I drank at him, and I got really, really drunk, and I got really, really sick. And I knew I was in trouble. And that was in September of 1985. And that is the last time I drank or did any mood or mind altering substance, anything that affected me from the neck up. But I don't count it as my sobriety date because I didn't know I was an alcoholic. And I am someone that if I'm going to be miserable, so are you. And so I was telling him he had to quit drinking and quit doing all this stuff because I was. And I am a real alcoholic. So you take away my solution, which is alcohol, and don't give me an adequate replacement, I get worse, not better. And I am now, you know, dry for a good year or so. I have these 2 little girls, and someone drives by the front of our house, and I thought it was someone from that first marriage. And I took those kids and hid in the closet for 6 hours. And this is the kind of behavior I do when I don't have a solution. And now I'm putting pressure on him to not drink anymore and do all this. And he finally went to an outpatient program, and he signed up for this outpatient program. And back then they had the family members come, and they would go, it's called significant other, and they would go and do, they would do a meeting also. And I remember going there, and there was this guy there, and he was like 6'4", bald, with these big horn-rimmed glasses. And he belonged to every 12-step program imaginable. I mean, back then in the 80s in Los Angeles, we had like 200 different 12-step programs. And he belonged to one for going to sleep, one for waking up, like all that. But he was joyful. And I hadn't been around anyone who had the light on in their eyes for a very, very long time. And talk about a program of attraction. And I was so defiant. I wouldn't have listened to anyone. But he took me aside afterwards, and he said, because now remember, I'm dry, so I'm not an alcoholic. And he told me to go to this Al-Anon meeting on Saturday morning, and that it would save my life. And I went to it. I don't know why, but I did. And I went there, and the women that were sharing, and the speaker had come into Al-Anon. She was married to an alcoholic, came into Al-Anon, and was sponsored by one of the first wives of the alcoholics. So they used the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, because Al-Anon, that's what they used back then, the AA 12 and 12 and the Big Book. And I related because, I'm a child of an alcoholic. I'm married to an alcoholic. I know how to surround my life with everything so I never have to really look at me. And so I'm now going to Al-Anon, and I'm doing all of this. And part of the requirement was 2 Al-Anon meetings and an open AA speaker meeting. And my very first AA meeting I ever went to was Wednesday night Pacific Group. And at that time we had, and that's Clancy's, started this group. And at that time you would line up outside because the secretary shook every single person's hand. And there was over 1,000 people that went to that meeting every Wednesday night. And they cleaned up and they showed their respect for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have to tell you, the energy, and I thought, wow, this is not what I expected. I thought, alcoholics are skid row. I'm still like this real disassociated from the fact that I'm a real alcoholic. And that Al-Anon sponsor took me line by line through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And guess what? I found out I'm an alcoholic. I was able to admit to my innermost self that I am alcoholic, that it's not the amount I drink or how I drank. It's the fact that what it does for me, and I don't drink because that happened to me and I ended up, left to die in an alley. I don't drink because I'm a child of an alcoholic. I don't drink because I married a coke smuggler. I don't drink any of that stuff. I drink because I like the effect produced at once when I have alcohol or any mood or mind altering substance go in my body. And for me, I am someone who could still quit, but I could not stay stopped, and it was coming. I could feel the irritable, restless discontent coming. So I ended up in the right rooms, and then my journey really began, and I started working the steps with a sponsor. I did not know that you could come into AA and just go to meetings and not get a sponsor, or just call a sponsor once in a while or whatever. I didn't know that was an option. I would have done that. But I fell into a group that everyone seemed to have commitments. They showed up early, they stayed after, they had sponsors, they were talking about steps. My sponsor would not give me my first year's cake, which is like an anniversary, right? I'm not sure how you guys do it there, but for us, it's a cake, not a coin. And get my first year cake unless I had done a 4th and 5th step with her. And so I was this young girl that was rebellious and just didn't really think it was going to work. But it doesn't matter why you take these actions. It's just the matter that you take the actions. And so I was going to get up there at the podium at a year and say, I worked all 12 steps. I did not have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, double mic drop, and I was going to leave. But what happens is these steps work no matter what my motives are. And I started to take those steps, and I did that 4th step, and I shared all those secrets. And she was old. She was like 50 years old, a lot younger than I am now. And I was in my 20s, and I thought I was going to shock her and she wouldn't understand, but she did. She understood all of it. And she just kept saying, you're going to be okay, kid. You're going to be okay. The one thing I remember about that 5th step is she told me my job, because I was so worried about my girls, my kids. And she said, your job is not to kill their spirit, because that's what we do in alcoholism. We kill our children's spirit. So your amends to those children the rest of their life is to not kill their spirit. And I have to tell you, you guys taught me how to do that. And if you were to ask all 3 of my kids, they would say their spirit was not killed. So they know they're loved, they know they're lovable, and they know they're enough. And but they still get affected by alcoholism, but they know those things because you taught me to do that with them. So I finished that 5th step, and she told me that night that by noon the next day I needed to contact my first husband and make amends to him. And by now I'm looking at not my part. The book is really clear. They says set aside the other person's stuff, and now it's 100% you. And so I had to look at my 100% me. I didn't get to look at the domestic violence. I didn't get to look at the fear and the terror of living that type of life. I had to look at my harms. And so I was terrified because at one point my daughter and I had gone in hiding from him when I tried to leave him. And but I just never ever wanted to feel like I felt when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous ever again. It wasn't even to not drink. It was to never feel that way ever again. So I followed that direction, and I made phone calls. And back then it was just dial phones. And I got the phone number, and I got a hold of him, and I made amends. And then he proceeded to tell me he had 2 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, like, how does that happen? And did he now all of a sudden show up to his oldest, his daughter's life? No, it took him until he was almost 17 years sober before he actually started taking right actions with his daughter. But that was none of my business. And part of my not killing the spirit, I never talked bad about my children's dads with them ever. No matter how resentful I was, no matter how hurt I was, I had you guys to come and talk to that stuff, but they didn't have to carry that burden. And so then, I proceed on to my, 8th and 9th step, and I now have my list. I want to make amends to my mom first because she was my most tortured relationship. And I'm so glad I have a sponsor, and I work all the steps with my sponsor. I run everything by with my sponsor. And so I talked to my sponsor, and she said, no, I think you need to do your dad first, right? And I'm thinking, that's going to be nothing. Now, remember, I'm an attention getter, right? And I'm like, that's nothing like being able to say your coke smuggler ex-husband is sober. I was just so into the wrong motives. And she said, no, do your dad. And I'm like, okay. And he was down visiting, and I went and saw him, and I made amends, and he told me he was proud of me and he loved me, because by then he was sober a while. And it was just very like whatever. And then a week later, he went to the doctor and found out he had terminal cancer. And what you guys did for me, it still brings tears to my eyes because it's the miracle of this program. The miracle of taking actions, even though I don't want to, or I think my sponsor's wrong, or I think you guys are wrong. It doesn't matter what I think, it matters what I do. And so I had the privilege for the next 6 months to bring Alcoholics Anonymous to him, to do the right actions, even though the rest of my family is very deep in the disease, very deep in all of that. And reactions, and they're going through their own fears and hurt because he's, dying. And I got to keep taking the high road. I got to go and be strong and take those actions with them, and then come to you and fall apart and just crumble, and I'm so indebted to you for that. And then, I'm now married, I'm married to my present husband. We have the 2.5 kids, I'm pregnant, gonna have another baby. He's sober, I'm sober. We're this great little AA couple. And then what would happen is Saturday morning would come, and he was like, he was sponsored direct to go to the yard, which is where we go and play baseball in Pacific Group and learn how to be helpful and useful and get along with others. And across from Clancy's house and at Clancy's house. And so he would drive off. Now, I want you to know, I could bring those kids with me and go, but it wouldn't fill my self-pity, right? Because I was in my self-pity. that he gets to go and I'm left having to clean the house and take care of kids. And I would sit there and I'd be fine all week. I'd wake up Saturday morning, he'd drive off to go play baseball. And I would think, why am I married to him? Why should I be married? He really doesn't treat me that well. And I would decide in my brain that I'm going to kick him out. And we lived in a very, very nice neighborhood. And so I would decide I'd go and get all his clothes. I'd go out on the front lawn and I would fling his clothes out onto the front lawn, right? And this is not sane behavior. And this is someone who has worked the steps, sponsoring people, commitments at meetings, helping, doing everything. But this urge to that this ain't it would hit me. And I'd throw all his clothes out there. And then I'd do something dumb, like call my sponsor. And my sponsor would say, he didn't do anything wrong. Go get the clothes, put them back in the drawers, get on your knees, ask God to remove your defective character, and then welcome him back into the home. And the first time he came, he drove up to the front and he saw me standing at the door. And he kept driving. So we don't know what I looked like when I was welcoming him back into the home, but I was going to welcome him back into the home. And then I'd be fine. And we'd be fine all week. We'd go to each of our meetings. We had one meeting, we'd go together. Everything was fine. And then next Saturday would happen and he would drive off. And I'd do the same thing again. I'd throw all his clothes out on the front lawn. Then I'd call my sponsor. I'd pray. I'd put them all back. And then I was fine again. It lasted about 3 or 4 times, right? And then God finally removed it. About 2 or 3 years later, we were both speaking at an AA meeting. I was the first 20-minute speaker. He was the second 20-minute speaker. I told that story, and he got this funny look on his face. He turned to his sponsor like, I don't know what she's talking about. So he gets up at the podium, he tells the story, and he said, I had no idea Denise was throwing me out and letting me back in every week. But he said, but I did wonder why there were leaves in my drawers. No one told me I had to clean up his clothes. And this is pretty much how my sobriety goes, right? And then we're both doing all of this. And then we have this opportunity to move 2 states away. And we're going to move away from our home group. And we're going to move away from this support system. And which I want you to know, it doesn't matter how long you're sober, moving is really, really challenging in sobriety. And so we moved to this little town in Washington State. And back then we didn't have all this internet and access and all that kind of stuff. And a phone call to my sponsor would cost like $40, each time. And we moved up there. And I got involved with AA, and he kind of didn't. He didn't make the move very well. And then he got really dry, and then he got violent in our home. And you guys have taught me, don't let those kids' spirit get killed. And so, I ended up becoming a single mom. And it was tough up there because this was a town that still to this day does not have speaker meetings. They don't believe in speaker meetings. They think this is ego. I guess they missed that part in the book, and they don't believe in sponsorship and definitely not strong sponsorship. And so I really had to rely on the big book and finding others to say, come with me, I'll show you how. Working with others. Like when it talks about when all else fails, find someone that's worse off than you and help them, right? And so that really kept me sober and mostly sane. And I now have these 3 little kids, and I had never been poor before, and I didn't understand what that was like, to be on food lines and to, have to stand on lines to get your kids' school supplies and do all that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, I have my little daughter when she was 5, the second middle daughter, when she was 5, she had this tumor that was in her middle ear, and we had to get into surgery real fast. And you guys told me to get on my knees and turn my will and my life over the care of God, but also her will and her life over the care of God. And I thought, you guys are nuts. I can't do that. There's no way. Because what if God is going to take her? And my sponsor just said, it doesn't matter what you think, just take the action. So I'd get on my knees. And then as I was getting up, I'd say, God, I'm lying. And, but it doesn't matter what my motives are. And so I did that. And what happened was I did not have to put my fears and my thoughts on my daughter. And my daughter was not scared when she went to get that done. You guys did that for me, God and you guys. And so she got this surgery, they got it, and we thought we were in the free and clear, and then 6 months later it came back again. And I want you to know she is now this wonderful, beautiful spirit in this world. She is wonderful. She's a little pop star. She helps people. She does all this, but between the ages of 5 and 21, we got to walk through that 14 times. 14 times those tumors came back. 14 times I got to get on my knees and be terrified that I was going to lose her every single time, and yet not put those fears. And she would sing Italian opera to the surgeons as they would take her in. Like, still to this day, she doesn't have fear around this stuff. And that's because you guys taught me how to. She was my kid when sponsees would call. And then if I was in the shower, she'd say, well, what's going on? Did you do a third step? This is her at 12 years old. What part of the big book have you read? Have you helped someone else today? My kids just know, because I would have big book studies in my living room. And that's what I got to do different from what my dad's AA brought into our home. Was alcoholism was a secret, and it is not a secret in our home. And thank God, because there was a time after I had left that husband, and literally I had $119 to our name. I'm living in a town I really don't know people, and there was a woman at the meeting that let us come stay in her basement until I could, either find a job. But meanwhile, I'm in and out of the hospitals with Margie, and I'm doing all this stuff. And I had this I think it was like $109, $110. And I had this station wagon, and you guys taught me to take the action anyway. So I went out looking for an apartment, right? And back then apartments were about $650 a month, right? And I went to this one place that was like $300 in a month. And the guy hit on me and said someone OD'd in it so I could get it the first month free. And I remember leaving there and pulling over and just sobbing, going, God, I don't understand this. I keep taking the right actions. And I don't think we're supposed to live like this, And then all of a sudden this stopped, because thank God for the 11th step. Thank God for that pausing and letting that intuitive thought come in. And then the thought was, well, if you had all the money in the world, where would you go try to live? And up the street was this apartment complex that was walking distance from my kids' school, had a playground, had tennis courts, had a swimming pool. And up in Spokane, you never see swimming pools. And I thought, well, I would love to live there. And then the thought came, was like, who are you to decide, take the action anyway? And I'm just always so blown away how this is a design for living, you guys. This whole thing outlined in the big book, and what we get to share with each other. So I drive up to this apartment, single mom, no job, $109 in my name. I go in, it was the nicest couple. I told them the truth. I told them what was going on. The complex had a $99 move-in special, and I left with keys to an apartment. That's how God works in my life. If I could just sit still long enough and take the action anyway. And then, there were times that were really hard. Their dad, went back and he was drinking. And so they didn't get to be a part of their life. And then, but I went back to school and I went to college so I could take my kids to school in the morning and pick them up every day. And I went on welfare. I did the things so that I could be where God wanted me to be at that time. And I didn't have to carry shame with it. I didn't have to do all that. I've 12-step many women standing in a food line. When you go to Pacific Group, you're taught to talk to people at least 5 or 10 ahead of you and 5 or 10 behind you in line. I took that and did it in the food lines. And so I would meet all these women that were single, and I would take the alcoholics to AA, you know, and I just would practice these principles in all my affairs. And then, you know, and now I'm making some friends. I'm sponsoring some women. I'm taking the actions you guys would have me take. And I remember I started a speaker meeting, and if I sat in the front row, it didn't matter if 3 people showed up or 20 people showed up, because I don't know who's in the room. And I would pretend I was sitting in my home group, a Pacific group, listening to a speaker. And that worked for me. And so I've always had strong sponsorship, thank God. And so now I go to take my cake, and my daughter, who had started the Alateen meetings there, my oldest daughter, and I've got my son, my third baby was my son, and he is on the spectrum. So I'm having even more time to okay, thank you. More need for me to be around and help him navigate, you know, autism. And back then they didn't really understand that. And so my daughter is with her friend, and they were very active in Alateen. And her friend raises her hand saying this is their first AA meeting. And my daughter, Mindy, comes to me. She's 20 years old. And she goes, uh-oh, Mom, I'm in trouble. I drink more than her. I had no idea that she was drinking. I had no idea that this was going on. And she got sober that day at 20 years old. Because the thing about alcoholism, I can't keep my kids from being alcoholics, but boy, I can set an example of where I will be. Sorry, guys, my phone just did something weird. I'm still going, right? Okay. And that I get to set that there is a solution other than active alcoholism. And I get to be a demonstration. I made lots of mistakes, lots and lots of mistakes, but I also made amends and did those kind of things. So now she raises her hand, but she started going to meetings with me. She's like, Mom, I can't do this. All the men are hitting on me. Like, I mean, because we don't have strong AA with principles and stuff in that area. And so I called one of my friends, friends down in Pacific Group, and she said, we happen to be going to Ireland for the summer. She can come and house sit for us, and we'll get her in the middle of the group. And I sent her down to LA, and she got in the middle of the group, and then she ended up getting a job, and like she just got swept up in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she's 22 years sober now, you know, and it's miraculous. Sometimes she's in AA and sometimes she's not. She doesn't always go to meetings and stuff, but she takes sober breath, and I'm grateful for that. My middle daughter kept going through those surgeries, but she's been free of that, and she married a really nice man, and she's living a life that you know, those things we wish for our kids, right? And she goes to Al-Anon, and it's so miraculous. And then my son who, you know, just has always struggled, but he was starting to do okay, and came to me and said, you know, all my kids saw me go to college, so they all decided they're going to college, and all of them did go to college. They were all able to do that. Even Patrick, who has learning disabilities and all that, he didn't think it was an option not to go, because he watched his mom go to college and start businesses and have careers and do all of this kind of stuff. And so off he went to New York City, and he went to school. He did great. He met a girl there. They lived together. The school hired him. He was doing very, very well. He's very high functioning. And I don't know that he always swore he wasn't going to drink because he didn't want to be like his dad. Who does that sound like, right? But he did pot, and he did this new pot that you can buy at the stores here because it's legal and you can drink it. So he's drinking THC, and it's like one of those cans is supposed to be, that's like 2 or 3 days worth of pot. He's drinking like 4 or 5 of them a day. And his girlfriend cheats on him. He gets devastated. He loses his job. We're in the pandemic. He moves home with me, and I'm watching my son start to die from the disease of alcoholism. And so I'm back in Al-Anon, getting the tools to be able to not enable him and do the things. And then the day came about 5.5 months ago that I called some friends in AA, and they came up and they tried to 12-step him, and it didn't work. He was having a psychotic break from marijuana, and he was having a psychotic break. And so the police had to come, and they put him in a 5150 is what we call it here, but, a psych hold. And then I so desperately wanted to be there for him. I think I can carry the message to my own family, but you cannot. I can carry it to your family, but I need you to carry it to mine. And what happened was he had a choice. Once he was off that, they hold you for 3 days. He could either be homeless, and this is a kid who's never, thank you, I'm finishing up, could never be on the streets. He'd never been to a drug dealer. He always did everything legal. And or go to the Midnight Mission. Clancy started down in LA, and he picked the mission. And I want you to know, he was at my house yesterday. He's 5.5 months sober. He had a sober breath, and he's learning how to be with men and to be an active member. He has commitments in all his meetings. And that's all because of you guys. I get to take a sober breath, but some people I love get to take a sober breath because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not what I think, not how I should do it or shouldn't do it, but just continuing to take the actions that you guys taught me to do. So if you're new, please do not give hope. If you are a suffering alcoholic with the most time in this room, please just get a sponsor that'll take you through those steps, take you through the big book, and join us on this incredible highway. Thank you for allowing me to share.